a lady came up to me after and she said, you know, I told my daughter I was going to come and listen to you speak, and she said, well, I'm going to go listen to Dr. Erickson. And she said, well, what kind of doctor is he? Well, he's a chiropractor. She said, Mom, you know, they're not real doctors. Now, what's important about those? All those stories I just told you, what's important is they're based on the idea that there is some type of reality. That's the important part. Now, do I agree with chiropractors aren't real doctors? Depends how you define it. If you tell me the only person who's a real doctor is someone who went to a medical school, right? They passed their boards, I would agree with that. That's for sure, I would agree with it. Well, how about when you go into the PhD world? They don't consider medical doctors real doctors.
They have PhDs.
They only consider PhDs real. If you go to the United Kingdom and do it in England like I did, they don't consider American PhDs worth a hoot. They say that's at about a master's level. Right? Well, how about the guy who said he's no master electrician? I agree with that. I wasn't. I passed a test that said I was. But you know what I knew? I knew how to hire the guys who were. The old timers who I had served my apprenticeship under. I was smart about that. So for 3 years I did all the WC hospitals wiring. Imagine? A young kid, right? Now one day I said, yeah, I'm quitting, I'm going to go to chiropractic. They started a pool to find out how long it'd be until I got thrown out of school. And it was close, let me tell you, a couple times. But when I was in England, I ran into a professor of mine who was a Marxist. I had never met one, actually. He was a brilliant guy. He was a smart guy. He was not an idiot. Now my wife would debate that with you because intelligence doesn't equate to all aspects of. And if you walk into a woman's kitchen while she's preparing your food and start criticizing the way she's cooking, it's pretty hard at that point for me to believe you're a very intelligent guy. Regardless of even if you're a medical doctor, okay? I start wondering, like, how big of an idiot are you? Now this has been brought up more than once over the years. But one of the things that Frank said to me years ago was, he goes, I want you to go listen to this woman give a lecture. She's a PhD, she's a sociologist. I was in the Department of Health Science. I said, what do I care what she's telling me? She goes, well, she's going to talk about a thing called a simulacrum, and I want you to listen to it. So I went and listened to it, and it was about the Child Protective Services in England at the time, and the fact that some kid was suspected of having been abused. So she outlined the whole process and the model that took place. The calls had to be made, forms had to be filled out, the whole thing was followed, and at the end, nobody had any idea what happened to the kid. And it didn't matter, because it wasn't about the kid, it's about the model. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. So that was my first exposure to it. But then Frank comes along, and he starts saying things to me that seems like very odd. I was being honored one time years ago up in Dunkirk at a big banquet. They put a thing. So I asked him to go with me. We went up and he said, well, where are all the blacks? There's no blacks here. I said, we're in Dunkirk. There's like Puerto Ricans and Polacks up here, I think. I don't think there's a lot of blacks. You racist, rotten, what? Whoa, ho, ho. I can take you where I did my clinical training. That was in the hood. That was in St. Louis. Probably 99.999%, right, black. I had no idea what he's talking about. I just thought it's where people lived. So the crazy part of it is my supervisor, Dr. Cox, Diane Cox, brilliant woman, wants to come visit me here. So she does, and the first night she says, what are we going to be doing? I said, well, my girlfriend's going to make dinner. We're going to go probably over there. Your girlfriend? Yeah, my girlfriend. You have a girlfriend? Yeah, as far as I know. I mean, I haven't talked to her in like, an hour. Who knows? Turns out, she thought I was gay. Now, why is this? Because the first year I was there, I spent a couple summers of the first year at the university when I was doing my doctoral work, and I was saying goodbye to the lunch ladies at the cafeteria at the university, and Billy, who was a high school principal, who was quite the funny guy, puts his arm around me in front of these ladies and says, listen, it's no shame in it. Just come out. Be who you are. Oh. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's a good one, Bill. If I protest too much, I got a problem, right? Well, I don't think it goes anywhere. Well, unbeknownst to me, it goes someplace. And the fact that I didn't chase women around, I was there to study. The only two people who ever went with me were two men. One was a doctoral student of mine, and the other was another doctor from Canada. So anyway, her husband never would have let her come over had he realized that I wasn't gay. This is crazy, right? So now Frank comes, and I'm running a couple businesses, and I've got different people. And I'm the kind of person that if you owe rent, pay your rent. If you can't pay your rent, come talk to me about it. And I want to know that there's a legitimate reason other than you didn't feel like paying, that kind of a thing. So he stays with me for, I don't know if it was a week. I mean, I felt like I spent a year with him one afternoon, And he goes back and he tells everybody, do you know Ken is a Republican? I didn't know it. I thought I was an adult. Honestly. I never thought of it that way, So I went from being a great guy who was gay to not gay and a Republican, apparently, and now holy hell broke loose, let me tell you. It was not a fun experience. So this was really a strange thing for me. So we got into debating things like, I come from the biomedical field. My area of specialty is in neurology and clinical neurology, but anything to do with in sports and everything else. And we got talking about, they did a study, this was years ago, about socioeconomic performance in kids in school, and they said the people who I think scored the highest in this study was, I think they were Asians. Then it was either Jewish, East Indian, whites were somewhere in there, and blacks were dead last. And the conclusion the author had was it has to do with the culture. It has nothing to do with inherent intelligence in the races or anything. It's whether or not the culture that you live in values, and if you don't value it, they don't do. And so Frank said, well, that's because blacks know that even if they do well in this racist country, they won't get ahead. They won't ever be given a job. See, so he starts the argument always with his conclusion, which isn't valid. That's not a valid argument. Has nothing to do with whether or not it's accurate or true. It's just not logically valid. Does that make sense to you? So I had some experience with this postmodernism stuff early on, and I had no idea what I was dealing with. So now I have a better idea, but I'm still scratching my head a little bit. So there's two things I'm going to do for you tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about the description of it and the consequences of it, which you already are familiar with. And then I want to talk a little bit about thinking about thinking. Why does it occur? Why is it happening? Do they have any points? And I'm going to tell you I think they do. It's very easy to get tribal about this stuff. So Jordan Peterson, I would assume everybody in here knows who he is, right? Now, you know how he got to be famous? Does everybody know?
C-16.
It has to do with the fact that Canada tried to,
C-16.
they tried to force, now this is interesting, force what you have to say. And Jordan said, look, never in the history of English common law has that ever happened. We have restricted speech for hundreds of years. You can't yell, but this is what he said. He says postmodernism, and this is just a description of what's going on, that it criticizes notions of reason, that there is anything innate to human nature. It objects to the concept of truth and objective reality. If you categorize anybody or anything in their mind, it's to acquire power. So you're getting categories only to oppress somebody. That's their thinking. Now, do you think there's no truth to that? I can assure you there's truth to that. The people who started this were not stupid people. They were intelligent people, and I agree with some of their basic fundamental. But what I don't agree with is where they went with it. Okay? Human nature is merely a social construct, so we can construct it in any way we want. Mao wanted to wipe out Chinese history, everything from 1960 back. Why do you suppose he wanted to do that? So he could instill his own. The first thing the Nazis had to do before they could do anything was they controlled media. They did away with art. They made little AM radios that they gave out that only got the government wavelengths. Propaganda, right? You have to control that first. Well, the first thing you want to do is shut down free speech. That's the first thing you want to do. And I'm totally against that. It came out, now postmodernism came about as Marxism as a failed intellectual construct. Now what does that mean? It means that once we had done the experiment, once there was a body count, we're talking about China, Russia, right? Stalin in Russia. I mean, they starved 6 million Ukrainians or something. There was 100, we don't have numbers on it because they hide it, right? We're talking, you know, the thing that I hear all the time is more people have died in the name of religion than any other cause. So I say, okay, well, give me your evidence for that. Well, the Inquisition. So I look it up, right? Now this is the numbers I found. Something like 3,000 to 6,000 people were murdered in a 300-year period. Now that's terrible, and I'm not in favor of it, but that's nothing compared to the 20th century. It's nothing compared to what the Nazis did. Now I'm raised as a little kid, at my earliest memory, with my best friend, a kid named John Heinemann, whose grandparents raised him, who were Holocaust survivors. So I grew up in his home. I didn't know any difference, other than they were weird. Like really weird people. I'm like, I don't get it. Like, John, his grandparents were very liberal about some things, but he couldn't have a toy gun. My mother didn't care. We shot each other, played cowboys, Indians, and all this kind of stuff. But I'd get my you-know-what beat off if I got caught with a Playboy magazine. Okay? And I did, full, right? I was no angel. But the point was, there was a difference in values in what they had gone through. One day Greta says to me, when I got older, before she died, she said, look, when you look at me, if you see a nice old Jewish lady, you don't see me. You see an idea in your head. I'm a human being. Right? Yeah. I didn't get that, really. Well, she was talking about what's going on today. Today, we don't have reference to people. We don't have references to real things. We have references to references to references. Those are simulacrums, and those are very important that we talk about those today. So, what happened? College professors are underpaid. This is according to Peterson. They're mostly hired as adjuncts, and it creates animosity in these people. And he says it's an extremely dangerous thing to underpay a large portion of your professors who are teaching your kids, because they have a sense that they're being mistreated. They have a sense they're being used. They're not being paid their fair. Now, he also said, as corrupt as sociology is a science, if you paid them more, you'd turn them all into capitalists. That's something you don't want to lose track of. That's an important idea. So you've got working class versus capitalists. Well, we know how that turned out, right? The proletariat against the bourgeois. The owners oppressing the workers. What was the result of that experiment? More people dead than any time in recorded history. So even the entrenched intellectuals had to say, yeah, that didn't really work. We really can't go along with that. So what they did, according to Jordan Peterson, is they did a little sleight of hand. They turned it into the oppressor and the oppressed. Not just the bourgeois versus the work. Now it's oppressor, oppressed. And they categorize it. You're either one or the other. So one of the other things they said, and I happen to agree with this, when I did my doctoral work in England, my methodology was something called interpretive phenomenological analysis. How do people make sense of and assign meaning to their lives? That's a tricky one. So if I ask any of you people, hey, tell me something about, I want you, as a thought experiment, do you have a relationship, say with a family member or a friend that went bad, or maybe it's always been bad, and if I talk to you about it, you give me your take, I talk to them about it, they give me a totally different take. Yes? Mm-hmm. That's your truth. Mm-hmm. And I support that. I don't think you have to give up that just to make somebody happy. I also think it gets difficult to look at objective truth when you're talking about the meaning people make out of things. I've got a student right now who is from the Netherlands. It's really interesting. She's a really interesting person, young girl. I said, what's the most interesting thing you find about the United States? She goes, you guys are really hung up on this Constitution thing. And she said, you know, it's just interesting to me that you're very, very focused on individual rights. Because in that culture, not so much. Okay. Well, is she wrong to say, do I have to get in an argument and straighten it? No. It's a perspective. It's valid in my opinion, right? So that's what she thinks, and that's what her been experience. Postmodernist ideology. Now, you've got Western culture, this is their take, is an oppressive patriarchy motivated by the desire, willingness, and the ability to use power as defined as the compulsion of others against their will to attain what are purely selfish and self-serving ends. That's their starting premise. That basically it's all about power. We're trying to oppress somebody. They don't believe in facts. They believe that the idea of facts is part of the white-dominated male patriarchy to impose the tyrannical structures of the patriarchy on the oppressed. So if you bring facts into what's called facts, they say, look, all you're doing is trying to manipulate me further. Now this happened with my professor. We were talking about athletes. And if you take a look at the people who've won the most, I think marathons for sure, they come from like one country in Africa, okay? We can look at any sport that you want and you can take a look. Now, I got involved with martial arts at a very high level. And I have 2 black belts. I have 4 actually, but 2. One is from probably the best judo sambo guy in the world. His name is Gokar Shavashian. He grew up in the Soviet Union as a kid. Now he lives here, lives in Hollywood. Very interesting to have a conversation with that guy, okay? Very interesting. You know, he goes, yeah, Americans hate Armenians because when they come over here, in a short period of time, they own everything. He goes, you know why? When I got here, I'm like, he came in as a kid. How many jobs? Can I have a job? Sure. How many? You can have more than one job. More than one? Well, how many will I get paid for? As many as you work. Seriously? There's no, he couldn't believe it. So he said when these people come over from a place like that, they see this as a land of opportunity. They start working, saving, reinvesting within their families. We sit around now and go, what? What I'm entitled to, right? It's a different culture. But what he said about the kids over in this was during the Soviet sports machine when they ran it. They would look at kids and say, you're going to be a wrestler, you're going to be a diver, you're going to be a runner, you're going to be a walker, whatever, okay? Based on physiology, bone length. Do you remember Jimmy the Greek? Yep. Right?
I know what you're going to say.
Sure. He got fired, yes?
Yep.
He got fired because he said, well, look, the reason blacks are dominant is because you took the big black kid and the other big black, and you put them together, you made big black kids, and you kept doing it till you got big blacks. You bred physical dominance, and they said that's a horrible racist thing to say, right? Meanwhile, the Soviet physiologist said, you give me kids, I forget the age, I don't even want to look at them. Tell me their age and their sex. Funny we should even debate that these days, right? Have them jump on a forced platform, and I will tell you their race. And I'm like 85%, 90%. Now, why would that be? Well, different races have different bone length. They've got different, now people don't like this today. This is you can't say this anymore. I'm having the debate with Frank, my professor, Dr. Ledward. He said, look, it's all about socioeconomic stressors that develop these things. Blacks do well because they're so oppressed, they have no other outlet. There may be some truth to that. But my argument was, well, why hasn't China ever fielded a top track team, ever? They have all of the economics behind them, they have everything, but they do great in what? Gymnastics, diving. Yep. You're not going to put them on a world-class track field and run with Usain Bolt. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen, right? Now, I don't think because you can run a certain distance faster than the next person that you're worth a nickel more. And I think when the Founding Fathers talked about all men are created equal, meaning women as well, I don't think they meant in ability. I think they were talking about value as a human being. And that's another part of this whole thing. You have to realize that when you start thinking this way, it's very easy to dehumanize people. And that's an incredibly dangerous thing. So central and secondary assumptions of postmodernism. One, central assumption is that there is a near infinite number of ways to perceive and interpret phenomena. That's a true statement. This is what my area of specialty was with my doctoral work. People can interpret anything any way they care to. Look, I live with a postmodernist. He's 6. He's 6 years old. Try to debate that kid. That ain't the way it is. That ain't the way it works, right? He sees the world in a certain way. And he's 6. So as he's aging out, he's starting to understand. My other boy's 11. I can make a rational argument with him, and I'll say, wait a minute. What about this? And how about consider this for a minute? He goes, yeah, that makes sense, Dad. Because I don't want to be so much like my father that said, you'll do it or else. You know what I mean? My father wasn't really big on the whole explaining and talking things through and, you know, and other than a slight limp and a tick, I think I turned out fine. I don't think The secondary assumption is that no particular interpretation should be privileged above any other. They're all equally valid. All right, now let's go back to my beginnings as a trades guy. I was working, you know where Bush Industries is, yes? I was on that job when we built it. I was a tin knocking apprentice, and all of the air handling units in the roof, all the roof penetration, not only did I put them in there, I built them. I cut them out by hand. In fact, the first day I worked there, I worked at the shop, they had me a big pair of bull snips, and I still have them, and I cut all those, at the end of the day my hand swelled up like I couldn't close it. Then the guy brought an electric pair over and threw it on the table and walked out. Oh, they were sweethearts, let me tell you. They were concerned with my feelings back in those days.
Yeah.
Well, while I was working there was another trade guy with an apprentice, and this one guy was up, I think they were electricians, up on a scaffolding way up in the ceiling, and he's calling down a measurement to the apprentice. Cut me a nipple 14 3/8. Kid cut it, throw it up. 14 3/8. About the third time, he says, throw your tape measure up. Snip, threw the tape measure down at him. Cut it that long. Which means to say there has to be a constraint on our interpretations. In some ways, he cut it wrong length. It will not fit, right? If a guy said, look, bring me a 2x6, I bring him a 2x4, and the guy goes, I told you it identifies as a 2x6. It's not going to fit in the damn wall. I don't care what you would, right? So we have to agree that there has to be constraints. And that's why the second assumption is wrong. So what are these constraints? Well, nature solves the problem by killing you, basically. Everything that interprets things badly enough gets dead or they suffer terribly. That's the natural world we lived in. My father said he thought his first name, I don't want to say it, religious group of people, it was something get wood. Because that's all his father ever said to him. Get wood. He goes, that's what I thought my name was for about the first 12 years of my life. Why? If you didn't have wood, and they grew up with nothing, no anything, you would literally freeze to death. Had no way to cook. If you didn't prepare for the winter, dead. Not a hurt feeling, literally, right? That wasn't that long ago. We're not talking that long ago. In nature, you know, if animals make very irrational decisions, they don't survive it. So that's how nature puts a constraint upon interpretation. Viable interpretations of the world, according to Peterson, should function to shield you from excess suffering and death through pure utility. Meaning it should work. It should function properly. Now there was a time when the whole society was based on these ideas. Out of the necessity for cooperating with others places constraints upon our interpretations. If I want to get along with everybody in society, there's a certain constraint to my interpretation. I can make a claim, this, that, or whatever, but if it's so wildly off the mark, and we have to then assume that there is a mark to be had, right? We have serious problems with this stuff. So postmodernism, this is what I'm going to talk to you guys about that you probably haven't heard. The state of culture where media has crossed the boundaries into reality itself. Culture, defined as your arts, your ideals, your intellectual expression of a society. What is the purpose of it? How we interpret and give meaning, my area of specialty, to the world around us. What we call reality is based by and large on culture. I met a biologist one time that had been working in India. He considered himself an atheist. And he said, you know, I never realized how much Judeo-Christian principle formed my thinking. Being an atheist, I thought I wasn't affected by it. But while he's in India, some of the other researchers there, they were trying to improve crops and growth and make it resistant to blight and all these things. And one guy said, why are you doing this? He said, well, because it would improve people's lives. It would improve poor people and people suffering. He goes, this has got nothing to do with you. This is karma. It's got none of your business. In that culture, you are where you are because of a cosmic wheel that's been turning. And the whole idea that you were going to be charitable comes from Judeo-Christian principles, in the West anyways, right? He was affected by that. Even though he identified himself as an atheist, he still believed that there was good work to be done, charitable work to be done, taking care of your neighbor, That's an interesting thing. Now you think about that for a minute. That's how important culture is, right? So how do we answer big questions? That's another thing that culture gives us. What does it mean to be human? How should we live our lives? So how do we get here? Well, this guy, Jean Boulard, outlines culture in 3 distinct stages. Pre-modern culture, according to him, is before the 20th century. Representative art in literature as they understood it through Judeo-Christian views and ethics. So when they looked out and saw a tree, they tried to paint the tree the way they saw it. In an actual, right? People were painted that way. But the culture in the West was really governed by the church at that point. Now, we had a grand narrative. That is the overarching ideological ideas or meaning applied to reality through culture. So there was an overarching idea. Look, there's real things out there, there's a good and there's a bad. Everybody in the culture agreed to this. Everybody agreed to this. Culture through arts, language, and education gave a consistent message, and that was that of the church. You just can't escape it. That's history, right? So then we move a little forward. Modern culture, early 20th century. The Industrial Revolution, rapid advancement in mass image production through photography, film, or print. That means that the culture was being produced through an extraordinary rate. You couldn't do this before the early 20th century. It did not exist. You could paint paintings, you could sing songs, but once we started developing film, once we started developing photography, right, those things, they gave a layer of believability to things. So now if you see it, it seems as real in its actual content as it does in its image. That happened in the early 20th century. New ideas began to emerge, such as secularism. Science became the religion, along with communism, counterculture of the 60s. All these different things started coming about because the grand narrative started to switch from the church and what we had traditionally believed into, hey, I wonder what's on TV. What's going on TV? What's going on in the magazines? What's going on and it looks very real because it looks like the real thing. It isn't a painting anymore. Does that make sense? Very important to realize what we're talking about. Right, modern culture. So it gives different answers to the big questions. Leave it to Beaver, right? That's teaching us what a family's about. Woodstock. Now that's an interesting phenomenon. You think about it. How many people went to Woodstock? A lot. I mean, a lot of people show up in this farmer's field. I don't know if there was a single fight. You'd think there had to be, but not much. It was peace and love and all this idea. Now, distorted from what the church would tell you, but still, you can think about, this is a short period of time, guys. Think about what's happening today. I mean, it's really changed, right? You had the hippies, you had space flight, the idea you could fly into space. This is changing our culture rapidly. And you can't downplay the effect that has upon people. Postmodern culture. Now, this is late 20th century to present time. Now an entire generation has been brought up surrounded by these mass-produced images, right? Boulard said that we are now so surrounded by mass-produced culture through the media that it's literally part of our reality. Now you folks here are a little bit older than, say, somebody, we go down a generation or down to my kids, right? You're going to see things differently than, so I don't worry about you folks too much. I worry a little, I'm preaching to the choir here, literally. But when you have this conversation with younger people, they look at you like you're crazy. Like you're totally, like, what are you talking about? Or as my son Colton would say, that ain't the way it is, Dad. That ain't the way it works. He comes down to dinner that night, slams the door open, walks in the kitchen and goes, I've been scarred for life. He's 6 years old. I'm like, scarred for life? What happened? Did the tablet not work? I mean, what happened? So all the videos on YouTube, postings on social media, they are as much of our daily reality as the trees and the cars that those kids see. Indifferentiated. This is a very serious thing we're talking about. Everybody, including Jordan Peterson, all these guys, describe it. They're not talking about what led to it, other than to say, well, there were some French intellectuals. How'd they get a toehold on it? This is how.
Excuse me.
Yep.
You have a, oh, okay, it flew away. That bee has been on your shoulder for the whole time. And I've been watching that.
I identify that as a fly.
I've been wanting to smack you so bad.
You're not the first woman to tell me that.
It's gone.
Is it gone?
It started to crawl up towards your neck. And
Was it getting a little bit, yeah.
close.
It wasn't his reality.
It wasn't my reality. That's right. So the postmodern world, our reality is made up of culture representations such that when we make new cultural products, I'm talking film, any type of visual thing, right? We're making reference to other cultural representations. We're making copies of copies now. Now this is hard for people who are a little bit older to get their head around. Culture is no longer based on an original reference of reality, but rather cultural products that we experience in the virtual world known as a simulacrum. Okay? Now, if I say to you, a simulacrum is no longer a simulation of an actual reality. That's what it used to be. People used to paint pictures of trees that they saw. But now they don't do that anymore. Now it's just, like if I ask you, what do you know about Chernobyl? How many people here have heard of it? Everybody? You have an opinion about it? Don't have to say yes or no. I imagine you do. Was the opinion based upon knowing somebody that was there? Was it based upon actual looking at trying to find source articles and things? Or was it from the television show that they had? My bet is most people probably from the TV show that they watch. You do.
My daughter lived in England, and the fumes came over, and they were restricted in some way. Yeah, I guess they couldn't give blood. Give blood.
So you have that ability, that little bit of knowledge based on firsthand. But then there's the whole thing. Well, what happened? What caused it? That mostly comes from somebody's media portrayal. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So that's a simulacrum. That's not the real thing. Does that make sense to you? Now, if I say, I want you to envision a princess in your mind, how many people would even think anything like that? Probably nobody in this room. That was painted of Princess Elizabeth. I can't give you the year, but we're talking what, 1700s. Now, right now, think about a princess in your mind. You got it? All right. Did anybody think that? Probably not. Right? She's the real princess. Now, the picture's not great here, but...
I'm thinking of a drag show.
Yeah, right, yeah. Well, there you go. How many people would be more apt to think about something like this?
Yeah.
That's a simulacrum. You're thinking about representations of The first one I showed you was a representation of reality. That was a painting that was done. The second one was actual reality. Nobody thinks of it. Nobody. Most of us think of this. Elsa from Frozen. Now this, I despise this movie because my sons watched it 5,700. You can only watch something for so long and make you crazy, right? But he wanted to dress up like Elsa.
Okay.
Do I have a problem with a 5-year-old saying that? No. He doesn't have any idea in his mind, girl, boy, whatever. So the other day, I had a lady come in. I don't want to give too much information about her, but she was talking about how she was very positive, encouraged with children exploring their gender journeys. And I said, no, see, you got triggered again. You see what happens? It's a trigger, right? You know, I had a guy when I was doing a lot of martial arts training, he said, never hate your enemies. It clouds your judgment. Mm-hmm. So I'm very I key into my own, when you get triggered like that, just notice it's a trigger. There's no real threat to you. It's just something, it happens to everybody, right? But if I know I can trigger you, I can manipulate you. It's very easy for me to do it. I can just look out and that's how people manipulate people. They know what the triggers are, right? So it's an incredible thing. It's tremendous. Nobody's ever thinking anything like it. I do that terrible impression with the one woman. You stop it right now. You sound just like him. I hate that guy. Take it easy. It wasn't even a good impression. It's a simulacrum. What are you worried about? But she came in and she was telling me that she's all in favor of I said, well, how about these kids who think they're cats and squirrels? And, well, that's part of the creative thing. And I said, okay, well, how about if they're a bird and they come in and say, look, today after school, I'm getting on the roof, I'm jumping off, and I'm going to fly around. Are you telling me you'd be out there, you, the staff and the teachers? And yes, honey, jump, well, certainly not. I said, what do you got against birds? The hell do birds ever do? Are you bird phobic? Now she's not too happy. I said, or is it because somewhere you still realize that that child's not a bird? If they jump off that roof, not good. Right? I said, so if that's true, why would we ever feed into other fantasies? Especially in a group of people incapable of making conscious, wise decisions for themselves. I'm asking questions. Put the stuff in the purse, and out she went. I went, where are you going? I was going to make cappuccino.
It doesn't exist anyway. They can't make a decision.
Well, that's what happens, cognitive dissonance, when you start to butt into it, right? Didn't like it. It's a fair question, I think. All right, so intertextuality, taking inspiration from something that's already inspired by reality, that's the copy, with an incestuous influencing of our culture being continuously influenced by other intertexts. This is what's going on today. Once something is stated, particularly in a manner that seems legitimate, by a legitimate source, then that takes on a life of its own, right? Well, then you take that and you do a further interpretation, and this thing becomes so incestuous and bound up that we lose all sense of any type. Now, this is done sometimes intentionally with parody and satire. It's done to point out the ridiculous of something, right? And there's a use for that. There's a utility to that. Right. Now, according to the gentleman that we're talking about, Billerard, he's saying that there's a hyper-reality now that exists. We're no longer able to distinguish between simulation and reality. Now, when I say we, this is age dependent. This is a stratified thing, right? But I'm going to suggest that we're all subject to it, everybody in this room. That's why we didn't think of a real princess. We thought of a Disney princess. It has nothing to do with a princess. That's just a fantasy thing that's been made up, right? But we're all part of it. We all are subjected to it. I've already talked to you about Chernobyl. That's another example of hyper-reality. How much of what you believe to be true is based upon first-hand experience or research you conducted using primary sources, and how much is from watching the TV show? We've talked about that. Right, so hyper-reality and wider implications. We're now quick to accept simulations as if they were fact. Reality shows. There's not, one thing you can be assured about a reality show is there's no reality. That's one thing you can know right off the bat, right? Instagram, TikTok videos, all these things, the impact of mistaking these simulations as real, they have on the big questions of what it means to be a human. What's it mean to be a man or a woman? To be a good and moral person? We literally lose our compass. We've lost our way. And I'm going to suggest it isn't really anybody's fault per se. You know, so when you're looking at folks going, what the hell is wrong with you? How can you think this? I'm hoping after my talk, you have a little compassion. Because it's very easy to get tribal. We're on the right side, and you people are out of your damn mind. Now, here's where I draw the line. When you start trying to force people to do things against their will, I believe in free will, I believe in freedom of thinking and freedom of religious expression or non-expression, whatever the case may be. I don't like the idea when people use this to weaponize it and then to force people against their will. And of course, it's always for the same excuse. It's for the good of all.
Oh, yes.
Every despot in history has used that as the excuse. I mean, would you think we would not learn by now? No. Pol Pot's the killing fields, Nazi Germany, Mao's China, Stalin's Russia. There's just been countless examples of what happens when you dehumanize people. You no longer can tell fact from reality. And then of course, but here's where the postmodernists are correct. It is about power. They're correct in that. I agree with that. People will grab hold of it, and before you know it, you could take a good person and they could be so corrupted they don't even realize they've been corrupted. There's a very famous thing, I'd have to look it up to give you names, but there was a senator that were going through like in the South, and all the itinerant field hands were out and they were picking, working, and he said to whoever it was, you see these people, they're good, honest people, every one of them. And he said, do you know why? Because they've never been tempted. Let me take them to Washington. They won't be good people anymore. See, I think you got to realize sometimes it's easy to look at the other people and just vilify them and demonize them. No different than they would do to you. What do you mean you're going to a tea party? What do I care? I find you people to be attentive and polite, and I don't even care if you believe everything I say or even agree with what I say. That's not really the point of it. What do I care about that? But for some people, the fact that it's the tea party, that's enough right there to set them off. So hyper-reality also brings in false news, fake news in information leading to Facebook jail, right? Silencing and censoring doctors and others who speak out against the grand narrative of the appointed authorities, such as the CDC, Fauci, World Health Organization, right? Never been a time in recorded history that in this country that's ever occurred. It's really interesting. So they said, well, chiropractors aren't real doctors, right? Okay. I don't really have a problem with that. Well, how about Dr. Robert Malone? Right? Who was the other guy, the cardiologist that slips? He's the most published guy.
University of Texas.
McCullough. Peter McCullough. He's not a real doctor either?
Paul Ryan, or not Paul Ryan, the other Ryan.
Yeah, there's all kinds of these guys, right? Remember I gave one talk and I was joking around a little bit. I said I found some real doctors in their natural habitat, remember? And I showed them. They had stethoscopes and everything. I mean, you know they were real, right? Not anymore, you're not, because you spoke out against the grand narrative. These guys were vilified. They were stripped of their medical licenses. They were sanctioned. Are you kidding me? This is crazy town to me. You got to be able to have a full, open discussion. I had a lady come today who asked me my opinion about a very serious surgery they want to do to her brain. And I said, look, in my opinion, I would get a second opinion. And she said, look, I really like the surgeon. I'm happy with what I said, well, at the end of the day, that's what matters. You have to be satisfied. But you certainly should be able to get another opinion or two more opinions if you want. Right? Whatever it is, you have that God-given right, in my opinion. Nobody has the right to shut down free speech, silence you, or anybody else. That's a terrible thing that's happening. There's so many interpretations and conflicting messages, we're no longer able to decide on the truth. Right? Is there a truth? Now, religion historically offered one grand narrative. And I'm talking to Judeo-Christian, the whole thing, right? Not just one little slice, but the whole history of it. As a culture, we have become disenfranchised with the very idea of the truth. Suddenly we're not comfortable with the truth anymore. Right? Now, I would say that's because there's no constraints. We'll talk about that in just a second. Postmodernism rejects the very idea of an independent reality and embraces the idea that any and all interpretations are equally valid, right? Let's talk a little bit about neo-Marxism quickly. An attempt to supplement the perceived deficiency of the orthodox Marxism. We know what happens under that thing. There's been a test. There's a body count. So the people who still subscribe to it say, well, we could fix that if we did it the right way, right? They add Max Weber's broader understanding of social inequality, such as status and power, to Marxist philosophy. Social inequality, anyone that has more than you acquired it by stealing it from you. They got it through some felonious means. This plays into the common tendency for humans to feel jealousy towards those who have more than they do. I mean, wasn't there a guy somewhere in the Bible named Cain that suffered from something similar? I don't want to step on any territory here, but that was the story I was told, right? Wasn't it about that? Jealousies and... Is that not a warning? Is that not saying, hey, this is what happens with people? Yeah, so it's still alive today, right? Injustices as seen through the lens of neo-Marxism not only justifies my envy of you, it's justified, but then also my actions to level the playing field and look virtuous while I'm doing it. So you're telling me committing violence against people? Yeah, if they're Nazis, of course. That's the danger in this. That's the danger in seeing the other not as you, not as part of you. That's why when Greta said, and she said, look, if you look at me and you see a nice old Jewish lady, she goes, you don't even see me. You see an idea in your head. You don't see me as a human being. That's a dangerous thing. I'm a person. I'm a human being. Right? Well, if you see people as evil, they're oppressing you, you have every right morally to attack them. That's the danger of this. To me, once you commit violence against another human being, I'm out. I'm not on your side anymore. Now, I don't believe that war, self-defense things are an act of violence. I don't define it that way. I don't define cage fighting as violence. A lot of people do, but you got to have a victim to have violence. These are two people agreeing to do it. I told my kids, you keep it up, I'm going to put boxing gloves on, you're going to beat the living hell out of each other. My oldest boy, I don't want to fight anybody. My young kid, I can protect myself. I'll punch him in the face. That's how he thinks. Right?
Make a bug.
He said, oh God. It'd be like two cats. It'd be this has led to a tremendous resentment and pathological anti-human ethos that says, hey, look, it's wrong to kill a cow to use its heart valve so a human can live. I wouldn't be talking to you today if they didn't kill a cow and put a heart valve in me.
Really?
I look pretty good, don't you think, for heaven? And humble.
Very modest.
Yeah, I had a heart valve put in 4.5 years ago. Now, was it morally incorrect? A cow lost its life so that I can be charming you young people today.
Cow doesn't have a soul.
It doesn't work.
Let's not even go there. Let's not even go there. That's the justification for it. What I'm saying to you is we can think about thinking about it. But ultimately, she's right. You have to say, where's the value in an animal versus a value in a human, right?
Right. Sure.
It's a judgment call. We used to have a thing called the church that led us in that. Now, though, in the world we're living in, hey, there's none of that. Well, I'm kind of happy that somebody had a steak dinner. I hope they used that for that. And that I'm here. Most days, I'm happy. There's some days I go, oh my Lord, what's going on? Now, environmentalists view humans, and this is something you can look this up. I found dozens of papers on this. They view humans as pervasive spreading cancers on the planet.
Except for themselves.
Yeah, now there's an interesting comment.
Yeah.
Right? There's an interesting comment. That's correct. But that's what happens when all of this stuff continues on. So, failure to educate children concerning the history of Marxism and or communism throughout the world. Big problem, guys. Talk to kids, young kids, and ask them, what do you know about World War II? Well, I know that we fought the Nazis and something happened. Do they have any idea about Stalin's? Do they have any idea about the numbers? No idea. And worse, you've got professors say that was made up, it wasn't real. That's even worse, right? Examples of how Marxist ideology resulted in genocide. More people have been killed in this than anything else in recorded history in the 20th century. Now, you know about this, Holodomor. 6 million or more Ukrainians starved under the Soviet regime from 32 to 33. There's people who literally debate that, right? They debate it. Great Leap Forward, they called it. Mao, 58 to 62, 40 million dead, maybe more. Some accounts are 70 million dead. Driven by what? Resentment, deceit, and arrogance. That's what Jordan Peterson says. Marxism has transmutated, it says transmitted, it should be transmutated into neo-Marxism and identity politics as a consequence of the French intellectuals such as Lacan, Derrida, Michel Foucault. I know quite a bit about that guy because I studied him as part of my doctoral thesis. Neo-Marxism found an inroad in American universities resulting in influencing mid-level bureaucracies such as school boards, right? Canada law, the Canada Law Society requires lawyers to provide a statement of principles for which they provide a template to you to include the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusivity. So they say, you got to provide us with a statement of your principles, but we're going to give you what those principles are. We're going to tell you what they are. Right. According to Dr. Peterson, ordinary people are too complacent towards mid-level bureaucrats who rule over them.
Yeah.
Mid-level. School boards. Right? These types of things that are going on. We become too complacent. So that's my presentation. I hope that it gave you guys something to think about. And I'll take any questions anybody has.
Got 5 minutes for questions.
So, going back when you talk about the rejection of the idea of reason by postmodernism, but whereas Enlightenment philosophy or modernism was based on the development of reason, Francis Bacon, those guys,
Right.
like that. So what the postmodernists do is they reject scientific method. Right? The scientific method doesn't necessarily lead you to the truth, but it gets rid of the untruths, right? That's what you do with scientific method, right? So that's one of the reasons they can, without any compunction, go after real scientists, right? And guys like Fauci can just say, well, you're not a real scientist, I'm the science, right? So that's it, because they reject scientific method outright.
What's worse than rejecting it, they claim it's a form of oppression.
Right. And
They go a step further with it and say, you're using it to oppress people.
Right. And then the other side is that if you want to stump a postmodernist, when they say reason doesn't exist, ask them how they came to that conclusion.
Well, there's all kinds of inherent, yeah, honey.
We had a speaker here in Tea Party from one of the local schools who said that his students believe that the world is flat. Now, I mean...
Well, let's think about it. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate with you. None of us know. I've never been up in space and looked and seen
Don't fall off.
the flat earthers got all kinds of reasons why we don't fall off. But here's the point, though. When you don't have absolute certainty, firsthand knowledge, then we got to ask ourselves, what's compelling? What's compelling? Now, I've never been up in space and said, I can tell you for sure, right? I've never had that experience. And neither of you and probably nobody else here, right? But what we say is there's enough evidence to suggest, through reason, that it's probably round, right? So flat earthers have their own reasons. They've got their own, it's the craziest thing. What to do with it? That's another question. I don't know. I don't have the answers for all that.
They didn't want to take any flights anywhere.
Oh yeah, they've got all kinds of crazy ideas about that. Yeah.
1 or 2 more questions as the can goes around.
Yep.
For you to contribute to the
Thanks.
work here.
So what's your solution?
I just told you I don't have. Here's my solution. Stay within your sphere of influence and do the best you can do. That's what you're doing here. That's what you guys do here, as far as I can tell. Work within your local. Work within your. People have asked me a lot over the last few years, why don't you take your kids out of school? They want to teach critical race theory, they want to do this. So I said, no. I want them to bring those things up because then I'm going to confront it with them. I'm not going to take them out and hide them from it. We're going to confront it. We're going to bring it into the open. So my attitude is when somebody wants to do it, do what Mike said. Hey, what's your reason for it? What's your, right? One of the first things you know about somebody is if they want to shut free speech down. You guys all know who Dennis Prager is, right? Yeah. You know, he differentiates the left, the far left from liberals. And one of the ways that he differentiates it, he says liberals are still willing to have an open debate with you. They don't want to shut free speech down. The far left radicals want to completely shut free speech down, right? So I'm all for free speech. I'm all for a debate. Let's have a debate. And maybe if I listen, I might learn something. Who knows? But I think free speech, being willing to talk. I also think watching ourselves, having an idea about how easily we're triggered emotionally, so that we don't fall into the idea of, well, you rotten, no, you know. Then we become the very thing that we hope that we're not. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? It's very, very easy to do it.
It's happening now.
It's happening all over the place. Yeah.
You want your children to be exposed to this because you are intelligent and knowledgeable, and so you are able to refute or discuss it with them. But you are singular, or only 1 or 2 people.
Yeah.
The rest of the children are being exposed.
No
and
question.
indoctrinated.
That's true. So what do? Do we run away from it? And how long can you run before they do get exposed? Say you save them in high school. How about now? Now they graduate. They got to go out in the world and on their own. I mean,
Some teaching about it, but not the whole curriculum under
well,
the influence.
all I can say is whatever you find in this world that you find objectionable, it has to be brought into the light of day.
Yeah,
It has to be-
Here's the problem. The newspaper will not allow you to do that. They censor me.
Well, don't let the newspapers raise your kids. Don't let the schools raise your kids.
Look at that gray hair. I have no more.
Oh, I feel bad for you. Can I show you this?